Hello, I'm Rageh Omaar and this is Young British and Muslim, and we're going to be discussing some of the most talked about topics and hopefully hear stories of young British Muslims trying to make a difference. And you too can join in the conversation at hashtag YBMITV on Twitter. But as always, please keep it clean, friendly and respectful. Now, each week we'll discuss a topic with the help of 3 guests here with me in the studio. And here's who's with us this week. Now, with Ramadan beginning this week, we wanted to look at the holiest month for Muslims. It's a month when Muslims fast by not eating food or drinking any fluids between sunrise and sunset, which here in the UK is around 15 hours, so a long time. But Ramadan also highlights one other amazing and little-known aspect about British Muslims. It's the month when they collectively donate the most staggering amounts of money to charity. British Muslim charities raise £100 million just during the month of Ramadan alone. That's equivalent to each British Muslim donating £371 per year. Now compare that to an average for all Britons who donate around £18 per year. And this vast amount of money is donated to causes that go to home and abroad, from Grenfell tragedy to floods in East Africa. Now, let's talk about Ramadan and also about this whole idea of donations and giving. Let me start off with you, Samra. And the first point is, how far and wide do these sort of causes go? Is it at home and abroad? Because you deal particularly in Manchester with a whole range of sort of issues.
We have seen in the past few years a great shift from the ordinary British Muslim individual who are actually donating to home. A lot of, obviously, these communities have a lot of link to back home, be it Africa or Asia, but also they've been sensitive and quite understanding the core message of Ramadan, which is helping your neighbours, understanding the community that you live in. So there's been a huge rise of actually also donating domestically.
Omar, I know you've been very, very closely connected with Grenfell and the aftermath and much else besides, and we'll talk about that later. But it's quite a staggering figure, £100 million raised in 1 month by a relatively small community. It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is quite staggering, and especially the fact that when you compare it to all Britons as well, we give far more amount to other fellow citizens. But I think it's part and parcel of the fact that, the month of Ramadan, to many of us, it means different things. But I think clearly from that figure, it means it's almost like a spike in your charitable giving, and that everyone feels that they want to give back to the community, whether it be financially or whether it be through your time of volunteering.
And it is the month, Shelina, where Muslims, because it's the holy month of Ramadan, they're fasting. So that it's all about sort of thinking about, doing, going without the sort of basic things, so you can think about, other things and how other people are suffering. It's the month where you're supposed to do the most good, isn't it?
It's a time of total radical transformation, and the work that we've done with Muslims in Britain shows that people completely change their lives, and one of those aspects is absolutely charity. So we found that 36% of Muslims are doing more charity, and this is even higher for young men. And actually, nearly 2/3 of Muslims are giving more to charity as well. So there's a real sense of wanting to share what you have with your immediate, your close neighbourhood and people around the world too.
Now, one of the things that has come up in several of the sort of discussions we've had on this programme is whether you're talking about, charity or relationships or, stereotypes. There's a big, difference between, the older first generation, British Muslims who came over whenever and younger generations. I know you've talked about Generation M, which I'm going to come on to, but you're saying that young British Muslims are just as keen to give, during this month as their parents or grandparents.
Actually, what we see among younger Muslims is they're going out doing more charitable work. So, for example, 18 to 35-year-old men are spending more of their time out in the community, and that's a big part of the Ramadan experience, and doing more work, not just giving, which is also important.
Why is that important, though? Why the distinction between going out and doing things and being visible in contributing to society, as opposed to, you know, giving huge amounts of money? Aren't they the same thing? Aren't they just as good?
I think people feel like they want to actually knit themselves into that local community. And I think for a lot of young British Muslims, they feel so closely wedded to the people around them that they are really quite motivated to see how they can help people on the ground to change their lives. So we see these brilliant things like people going to homeless shelters and soup kitchens, like last year's example of going out to help the survivors of Grenfell. For young Muslims, it's not that they want to be seen to be doing it, they want to actually do it.
Talk about action on the ground in Grenfell and the response to that. I mean, Omar, tell me about your story with that. I mean, you live locally, you know, live and work and, well, live and pray sort of locally. How did you get involved? And tell me about your story and involvement in this from the beginning.
Well, actually, it was, as our, you know, the viewers will know, it was during the month of Ramadan. So it was during the 14th, and I represent a charity, an organisation, a social enterprise called Ramadan 10 Project, and we carry out an open iftar throughout the month of Ramadan.
Now, explain what iftar is to people who don't know. I mean, all of us know what it is, but what is iftar?
So iftar is the Arabic word for breaking a meal. So you're breaking your fast.
Right.
So breakfast, which we have in the morning, is breaking your fast. Hence, you're sleeping from when you go to bed, and the whole night you're not eating anything, and in the morning you're breaking your fast.
Right.
So ultimately, it's the same thing, but during the day for Muslims.
Yeah. So you fast during the day, and iftar is the meal you have to break the fast at sunset.
Precisely. Yeah.
Okay.
And we organise this, and we invite people of all faiths to come together. Approximately 300 to 350 people per night in London. And you know, in 2017, when we were organising this, I actually were finishing up from our central London location and heading back to West London, where I live, and I was quite astounded to see there was a few roads closed, a lot of traffic. I got home quite late, and then that evening I started getting phone calls and text messages. Turned the television on, and I obviously saw the images, which we all have seen and will never escape our minds. And I rushed to the scene. A lot of people were asking if I was okay, and family members especially. And it was very, very sad to see that you know, the response wasn't as quick from local authorities, but the response from the community was phenomenal. You know, this is where I actually met Samra as well, and other amazing charities who were on the scene as well, one of the first respondents. And we put together an organisation which was spearheaded by the National Zakat Foundation, which put together major charities to support the families. And I was involved in that, in the Grenfell Muslim Response Unit.
And we'll come to the anniversary, obviously, which is on sort of June the 14th. Samra, tell me about your response to this as well, because you actually, your home is Manchester, right?
Yeah, our charity is based in Manchester. It was founded there. We've been operating for the past 25 years.
Tell me what it does.
So Human Appeals is an international NGO. So it provides food security, WASH programs, sustainable development programs in 25 countries across the globe. But more domestically, which I manage, we provide grants to organisations like Ramadan 10, to grassroots organisations that tackle homelessness in Greater Manchester, also across the UK, surviving winter, to help the isolated elderly, to homeless people across the UK, as well, obviously, responding to disasters, be it Manchester Arena attack or Grenfell.
I'm always talking about the sort of response to sort of Grenfell. I mean, it's been an incredibly tragic year. I mean, across the sort of board for everybody in this country through various tragedies and terrorist attacks. You responded also to the Manchester Arena attack. I mean, tell me your recollections and how you responded, and how people reacted to you as a British Muslim trying to help in the wake of an attack that was, you know, claimed in the name of this.
I think Manchester is a very, very special city. It's a city that was shocked by this attack. It's a city that knows the understanding and their values and ethos of togetherness, of solidarity, of cohesion. It's really embedded very well within their everyday life. So this was shocking for everybody. We've launched a campaign called Muslim for Manchester, where we encouraged all our community to donate, to volunteers, to actually just even attend the visual and.
Was there any suspicion from any quarter, though, the fact that, you know, Muslims were getting involved, you know, in the wake, particularly of Manchester?
I mean, I really had to do the call whether we should do something or not. And I was really eager to do something, because not doing anything is completely passive, and is you turning your back for the very city that actually hosts you and hosts all your operation and your work.
Okay, we're going to continue talking about all of those things. There's much more to sort of get into. But across the month of Ramadan, communities will be holding events and iftars, as we were hearing, and charity initiatives right across the country. But we asked one charity in Oldham to film for us what they'll be doing to help people where they live.
My name is Naseem. I'm a co-founder of a charity called UKEF, UK Education and Faith Foundation. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we're at the Oldham Food Aid Hub, run from the Unitarian Chapel in Oldham. Just gonna run through what we do here. Okay, here we are inside. We've got the stock building up, as you can see. Everything's going out onto the shelves, inshallah, to be served to the people today. You can see the shelves are looking quite empty, but you can see the wide variety of items that we stock. These are from donations from the local people. We do not get any public funding at all. This is all from donations, from the kind donations from people, from schools, churches, colleges, madrasas, mosques, and local people, individuals who like to either donate by money or donate food items to the Oldham Food Aid Hub.
When you have nothing, come in here, using the hub, you have some to eat while you're waiting, you get food course and everything. It does take a vast amount off pressures of day-to-day living, mentally, physically and emotionally. And without the service, there's a lot of people, I don't know what we'll do.
Shelina, that's an example of exactly what you were talking about earlier, about actually not giving to the donation box, which is vital, of course, and British Muslims do it in huge amounts, but getting out in the community and doing that.
I think we see this in Ramadan almost as a sort of peak Muslim time, but actually it's going on around the year, where we see that the number of British Muslims being born in the UK is increasing, and we see this sense of really feeling quite tightly intertwined into their local communities and feeling the heartbreak of people around them and wanting to be part of that. And what was really interesting about the video was the gentleman was talking about how various interfaith organisations, different community groups are working together, and these young Muslims, inspired by their faith, are bringing everyone together to serve that community need.
I mean, you've done a whole survey of this whole issue, haven't you? And particularly how, brands, major sort of brands are looking at the Muslim community as a sort of demographic in terms of how they contribute. What's been your findings? Because it's an area that, let's be honest, there isn't a large amount of sort of discussion in mainstream media.
So we've just released the report, The Great British Ramadan. So Ramadan is obviously a global experience, a global occasion, but there is a very distinctly British feel to it. And that's driven by these young Muslims that we call Generation M, who bring their faith and modern life together. And based on their place in the country, are saying actually they would love big brands to reach out to them. So we found that nearly 2/3 of Muslims are saying that they're really disappointed by the way that brands are completely disregarding the occasion that's biggest after Christmas and Easter. I mean, it's quite incredible to think that 4 million people are totally changing their lives, and businesses and brands are just not aware of what's going on. And what's even more staggering is that the Ramadan economy is worth something like £200 million. So these are huge numbers of people changing their lives, and they're just saying, please, can you recognise that this is part of British life?
Do you think there is beginning to be some thought amongst major brands on this, that 4 million people are going through this pretty profound experience? They're, giving £100 million out of their pockets. I mean, not a wealthy community either, giving those kind of numbers. Do you think people are starting to wake up to that, or is it still we're at the bottom of the hill looking up?
Well, if you go out into the supermarkets in Ramadan, you will see some of them are starting to show signs of Ramadan, and it's quite exciting. When we talk to British Muslims, they say, I went into the supermarket and it felt nice to feel recognised, but they're saying they're not doing enough. It's all very traditionalist food, it's all very bulk bags of rice and flour, and yes, you do eat more rice and flour, but actually they would like to see more diversity. So, British Muslims are foodie seekers. They want more food, they want more variety, they're thinking about health and wellness, they're thinking about celebration and community. Of course they're thinking about food, but actually they're saying, 3/4 of them are saying, give us more on the high street.
Is that what, you're your work around sort of, iftars and are really about, Ahmad? And tell us how and why.
I mean, for me, growing up in the UK, what we primarily want to focus on was the idea of creating spaces of spirituality, dialogue, and empowerment, and connecting those together. And for us, we found with a lot of young people, and particularly over 70% of our volunteers and also guests are under the age of 35.
Right.
And so they're looking for a third alternative space, if I can say. So away from home and away from perhaps maybe the local mosque or the gathering you go for congregational prayer in the evening, and a space where people can feel them to be like themselves, feel confident in their British identity as well as their Islamic faith. And I'm not saying we've got it. We're working towards something which hopefully is creating a space where people feel there is that fusion of identities coming together. So I definitely see the fact that, so I sometimes find it quite amusing when I go to supermarkets and I see the Ramadan section and it's just maybe a particular culture within the Islamic community, if you will. Again, 4 million people, not all of them eat specific foods.
And the spaces that Omaar, like the Ramadan can provide, is also like it create that engagement and the dialogue with your own colleagues. Like we were speaking earlier with your director, of like what is actually like if to fast 15, 16 hours. This will be the space to bring your friends, your colleagues, your co-workers, your neighbors to experience what it's like to break your fast with a wider community.
Okay. Again, well, lots more to sort of talk about and pick your brains on. But during the acts of terrorism over the last year that we've been talking about and which has scarred the country over the past 12 months and left such a trail of destruction and suffering, there have also been acts of courage. And one of those was the man who became known, reluctantly, I have to say, as the hero Imam. Mahmoud is the Imam of the Muslim Welfare House in Finsbury Park and was there when Darren Osborne attacked Muslim worshippers as they came out of a mosque during Ramadan almost exactly a year ago. Earlier, he spoke to me about what has happened in the years since.
Personally, for me, it's been a collection of new experiences, being put in. Being raised to or I don't know how to put this really, but gaining prominence or a station that I've not been prepared for, and don't think I'm worthy of being given titles that of course I don't deserve.
And things like hero Imam. That kind of
yeah,
thing.
exactly. Yeah. Being in fact showered with accolades and praise and even awards for an act that I think was, I don't just think, but I know was a normal act, normal for a Muslim and normal for a human being who respects process, who respects law and order, and respects systems that are in place to safeguard and protect everybody's interest. So it's been quite an experience over the last year.
But at times a bit uncomfortable from what you sort of say.
Yeah, because I'm not. I'm never. Well, I'm not a person who craves attention. It's quite ironic me saying this on a TV show, but I'm not on social media. I don't have a YouTube account. I don't vlog. I don't blog. None of my talks, none of my sermons, none of my lectures, none of my recitations, even during Ramadan. That's 7 Ramadans where I've led Taraweeh, which is the evening prayer in the month of Ramadan. None of them have I recorded and put online or shared. And I don't say that to boast or to brag or to feign humility and modesty, but it's just a character trait of mine. So this whole year has been quite strange for me, and I've continued to try and direct the focus and attention to the victims.
Yeah, British society has often had, you know, a lot of stereotypes about British Muslims, and the role of the Imam and the role that Imams like yourself sort of play in your communities has often been a stereotype for non-British Muslims. I suppose one of the things the last year and this, you know, accolades and this focus that you talk about has done is to sort of show the other side, that, you know, we are normal sort of human beings, and what you do is a normal human beings. Do you feel that it is at least sort of tried to sort of break down some stereotypes, that you did what any other person there doing, whether they're an Imam or not?
To a great extent, it has. I think what the British public still are unaware of concerning Muslims is how normal we are, is how our interests are almost identical to everyone else's interests, and we don't create a barrier or distinguish ourselves from, if you like, the non-Muslim counterpart of ours. We support the same football teams. We hang up the same posters of football players. We eat in the same restaurants. We use the same jokes. We use the same references. We watch the same movies. We watch the same TV shows. Our interests are in line. Our culture is entirely assimilated. Except for
responses to the kind of experiences that happened at Finsbury Park are the same.
And exactly, a few people, a few bad apples, hogged the limelight, or you can say the media gave them the majority of the attention and focus when reporting on Muslims, and justifiably for their hate speech and for their incitement of violence and for their ideologies and for their messages that were contrary to the spirit of Islam. Over the last year, we've had that opportunity to learn from others and to share with others and to sit with others, and where I had never sat with a rabbi prior to last year, and in doing so, over the last year, one learns that there is very little that we have very little that we disagree with, even religiously. There is very little. So the common ground is so vast that there is so much to work and cooperate on collectively and as a group, and very little that we disagree on that we can put to a side.
Imam Mohamed, Mahmoud talking to me a little earlier, and very interesting conversation. I mean, obviously he finds the attention of what happened a year ago and his response, you know, uncomfortable, but it did break down quite some stereotypes, don't you feel, Samra?
I think, it enhanced a good positive relation. I mean, I think sometimes unfortunately, most of the negative news so what I'm trying to say is Muslims get a lot of negative news in the media, and I think this story, however reluctant he was to take this award, he was seen as a hero, and he did something very heroic in a moment that any anger would have been rightly justified. You know, so I think it was, you know, we got to continue that cohesion.
I'm just wondering how much about charity and British Muslims and, you know, contributing and going out there to help people, not just in, you know, who are Muslims, but way beyond, as that example of that charity in Oldham was saying, how much of that is driving, you know, this idea that, you know, people are, as, you know, Imam, you know, Mahmoud was saying, fully integrated. You know, we have the same football teams, we like the same bands, etc. Do you think it's part and parcel of that process?
I mean, I can add my 2 pence on this. I think there's a lot of, you know, our forefathers and many generations before us have done some wonderful things and contributed to many different societies. And I think primarily, for me, it's unfortunately all that work maybe, you know, sort of quashed because of an act which is, like the Imam mentioned, a few bad apples, which is picked up and framed by mass media, and suddenly, you know, that communication out to the masses then sort of you know, spikes up again this sort of hostility and prejudice and discrimination, where actually on the ground there's a lot of amazing work being done by so many individuals and charities, and I think that unfortunately goes unnoticed because it's not being picked up that much attention. If those stories actually were given the same airtime compared to, let's say, stories which give a very bad name to Muslims and British Muslims, then, you know, we would see a very different demographic and you know, perception and engagement between different faith groups.
One of the things that young Muslims talk quite a lot about is the challenge they face about being stereotyped as terrorists. So if we look at the Muslim population, 1/3 are under 15, 2/3 are under 30, which means that September the 11th has been a really massive turning point for all of them. They've either grown up afterwards or born in their shadow.
That's 2/3.
2/3 are under 30, so they've pretty much formed their formative years after September the 11th. And they talk about how stereotyping is really very much their lived experience. And of course, when a horrible terrorist attack happens, that simply reinforces that idea. And then suddenly you have this inspiring Imam who cuts through all of that. And really, when we look at what he did, he's inspiring for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim or not. What he did is something we all aspire to be. And that, I think, can rebalance some of that conversation. But it's when you're trying to, young Muslims talk about, they're trying to fight the stereotyping, and they need these kind of figures to show that actually this is what normal Muslims are like.
What's it like when you're reaching out and working on the ground? I mean, I'm just wondering, I mean, you know, interesting things about that piece that we saw from Oldham was, you know, there were, you know, just people from all walks of life, ages, religious, non-religious, white, black, Asian, doesn't matter. I mean, when you are there as a young British Muslim man, Omar, or you're there somewhere as a young British Muslim woman and helping people, you know, outside of your immediate community, do all the sort of barriers sort of melt away? I mean,
absolutely. I mean, in my experiences with homelessness, I have met Naseem, and they do incredible job. I mean, they actually sit with us with Human Appeal and other charities at Homelessness Faith Summit. So actually, how do you actually end off sleeping on homelessness by 2020? We have got that vision in Greater Manchester to work towards that. And when I go and work with our local partners, you know, you see everybody. You realise actually, poverty could not just impact your neighbour and the very service user that you're trying to help, but it's also something, you know, I'm very aware of it. You know, I've lived in, you know, with a guardian that only had £2 in their pocket at some point in my growing up. So you understand what poverty is like, and we all could be subjected to it. But it's very well received. You know, they see us and they're really humble and not oblivious to the hijab in my head, and very well received for the services that I'm providing.
Can I just add also to that? I think, you know, part of our sort of philosophy and ethos at RTP, Ramadan 10 Project, is that we focus on servant leadership. And what I mean by that is leadership at the service of others, and not making an example of people, but being the very example that you want to see change in society. So I think quite often this traditional concept of servant leadership is not really often, maybe often spoken about, but not put into action. And I think for us and for all these amazing examples that we've looked at today, there is this theme of servant leadership, that we are, you know, on the front line in our communities, contributing to society. And we're not having this conversation about, is Islam compatible with Britain? Yeah. You know, and I think we're way beyond this question of integration. We're at a question now of contribution and the question of actual servant leadership and the ideal form of leadership, and how does that look like?
That's interesting, going from integration to contribution. Now, you can take part in this conversation online at #YBMITV, and of course, keep it respectful. Now, in October, I was invited by some friends to go to the Outer Hebrides. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. It's the most wildest, beautiful sort of Western Isles off the coast of Scotland. Never did I think that there was going to be a mosque built up there. But each week we have try and highlighting inspirational people from around the country who are achieving great things and making a difference. And this week, the story is about one man's mission to give back to one tiny Muslim community in time for Ramadan, a community which lives in the Outer Hebrides, one of the most remote and unlikely places to find Muslims in the country.
Imam will stand this way. This is first ever mosque in history of the Isle of Lewis. First ever mosque ever. And you know, 35, 40 years, the community have been waiting for this. They have been secluded a little bit for their own reasons. And you know, a mosque is such an important part of a Muslim person's life. And if you don't have it, it can distance you from your own cultural and religious roots. It'll bring people together. They used to congregate in people's living rooms. They would do Eid in someone's house rather than going to the mosque. So can you imagine them coming here, sitting here, there's an Imam here, they have some food here, open their fast here. When I would shake their hands, they weren't interested. They would turn their face that way. To now, people actually coming themselves to the door, donating to the mosque. Islanders who are Christians, hardliners.
They wanted donations for prayer mats, so we went down yesterday and donated.
You've donated money to help the mosque?
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to going in and seeing what they've got, and I think it's about time.
Islam and Christianity have more or less the same values. There's not much difference. So, you know, if we want to worship God and they want to worship God, we respect them. It's an open door policy. Anybody's welcome here. I told the committee that after I'm done and I go back, they need to build more bridges than they've had before. This is a perfect opportunity for them and the future generation. And we can all live in harmony. The islanders here who've been living here for 40, 50 years, the Muslims, they've earned the right. They've respected the culture, the society. They've been law-abiding citizens. They earn the right to pray. For the first time in the history of this island, how many hundreds of years it's been here, they can actually pray the first Salah namaz here for Ramadan. I'm going back, but they have to carry it forward. And this mosque, inshallah, will be here for a long time.
What's your reaction, Shelina?
It's given me the warm and fuzzies.
It was amazing to sort of the idea of a mosque and, you know, in time for Ramadan in the Outer Hebrides. I can tell you it's a remote place. You know, it took me 15 hours to get there, to drive and boat and everything else.
And I think what they've done is something that, like you say, the Generation M is actually doing, is actually that whole community cohesion where everybody, irrespective, people of faith and no faith, could actually come together and build a place of worship or a safe space for everyone.
Now, let's look going forward. I mean, it's been a, you know, pretty momentous and, you know, at times very sort of tragic sort of year. But going forward, I mean, in this Ramadan, what are your sort of plans? Let me ask you first, Omar, because as you mentioned earlier, June 14th is the first anniversary of the Grenfell tragedy. And what will you be?
So for that evening, we'll be organising a special open meal dinner. We're inviting people of all faiths to come together from the community, and this will be in West London, in St Mark's Park on June the 14th, so after the silent walk. And this is in commemoration for those who are tragically no longer with us from the Grenfell tragedy. And again, opening our borders to sort of create that community spirit that we felt when the community came together, and it's been, you know, a year on, and just being in there in solidarity with the families and the survivors. And also for us, it's the busiest period of the year. Albeit it is my favorite time of the year because I get to meet so many wonderful people, and again, just being at the service of the community. So in London, for 30 nights, we have an open iftar, which is a free meal with Londoners of all faiths and backgrounds are welcome to come and join us. And as well, the first time for us this year is we have a UK tour. So we'll be traveling around the UK, but not as far as Scotland, unfortunately, this year. Maybe next
Ramadan.
Maybe next Ramadan.
Samra, what are your sort of plans and activities and hopes going forward?
For Ramadan, I mean, if I speak not only just for Human Appeal, for all Muslim charities, I think this is a very special a month for all of us, for raising awareness about the plight of the people that are suffering both at home and also abroad. And on a personal level, we'll be very busy in actually raising awareness of the plight of the homelessness in Greater Manchester. So we're looking at, hot meals for the rough sleepers. We'll be looking at prepaid gift cards to give to those actually who are from households from food insecurity or homeless people, as well as we'll be giving cash grant to destitute migrants who don't otherwise have access to public fund. When it comes to Grenfell, we'll be celebrating the heroes, everyday heroes of the volunteers that came after the aftermath and responded to Grenfell. So there's a lot of plans going on.
A lot of plans going on. Shelina, going forward, and your studies about this whole issue, what are your hopes, particularly when it comes to the work with brands in recognising, this demographic of Generation M?
We're very much hoping we're going to start to see more brands picking this up. So we know that 2/3 of Muslims want to see more on the high street for Eid, for example. But we hope they're going to start talking to Muslims in Ramadan as part of a wider long-term engagement, because one thing that Muslims consistently say to us is they want brands to talk to them and they want to have better products and services, and brands do have a legitimate place to play in that conversation. They can offer the right products without infringing the boundaries into that spirituality and the worries of commercialisation.
Okay, thank you all very much for coming. It's been a real delight and pleasure hearing your stories. And that's it for this episode. But if you haven't done so already, let us know what you think by using the hashtag YBMITV. And thanks again to my guests, to Samra Saeed, to Omar Salha, and to Shelina Janmohamed. Thank you all for coming in.